we don't manage to end on time. My name is Alice Jones. I work here at the University in the Marine Biology Group. And welcome to this session on charismatic marine predators and the primary production that supports them. And our first speaker is Paul Rogers from Aquatic Sciences.
Okay, thanks very much, Alice. Thanks everyone for coming along today. Today I'm just going to give you a very brief snapshot of 4 of our key projects that we're running at Aquatic Sciences at the moment on pelagic shark research. This research is being conducted as part of the Threatened, Endangered and Protected Species sub-program, which is part of the Marine Ecosystems program at Aquatic Sciences. Okay, so the 4 projects I'm going to provide quick updates on today. The habitat use and population structure of short fin makos. That pretty much integrates 3 previous projects that have now since been written up. We've got a current project that is funded by the FREC, which is on sharks and marine industries in Spencer Gulf. And we've also got, is this on?
No, I don't think so.
Sorry about that. We're on. So we've also got another project which is part of the larger GAB program on biodiversity and habitat use of pelagic sharks in shelf, slope and oceanic habitats in the Great Australian Bight. So that's part of a broader program. The program is program 4.1, which is part of a larger, much larger program. Okay, so the 4th one that I'm going to discuss is the white shark monitoring of the Neptune Islands in the Neptune Island Group Marine Park. Now we actually estimate residency of the white sharks out there on an annual basis now. So the 4 main tenets, if you like, that we use to provide spatially related management advice for these listed and protected species are the life history. So we collect information on a whole range of facets on the life history, the movement and the habitat use and overlap of the habitats of these pelagic sharks with human activities. All of that sort of integrates down into what we call connectivity, which is about how these animals and their populations, the individuals and their populations, interact in a way to structure the stock or the population across the broad scales that these animals use. So it's a key and important tenet in understanding the ecology and the systems that these animals live in, because they span across huge spatial scales. Their habitats do. Okay, so the first of the projects, these snapshots that I'm going to give you today, is on that habitat use and population structure of the short fin mako shark. It's a listed threatened species. So it's an animal that has a giant range. They're found throughout the oceans, throughout the world. The aims of the project were to assess the habitat use of the species here in Australian waters, particularly in the Great Australian Bight, and also to compare the scale of the genetic and the movement-based connectivity across the scales that we worked out to be the range of the species here. We then, at the time that this project was first developed, goes back to around about 2008, the key question then for managers right throughout the region, throughout the Indo-Pacific region and more broadly, was what is the degree of cross-equatorial dispersal and distribution of our populations. Okay, so we used satellite telemetry and we've tagged 19 different short fin makos now from small juveniles around about 1 metre long all the way up to large adults of around 2.8 metres. I won't go into the methods, we don't have time today, but suffice to say we've collected around about 300,000 kilometres of tracking information. We've been able to integrate this information with the help of FREC value recently to be able to generate these time spent per area plots. So what these plots actually show you is the relative amount of time one individual, each of these maps is one individual, shows you the relative amount of time that individual has spent in different parts of shelf waters of the Great Australian Bight, the Bonnie upwelling down here, and you can see this animal that we tagged in Bass Strait actually migrated across to New Zealand and used shelf waters on the east coast of the North Island, New Zealand. From there it migrated up and down to New Caledonia over the winter. So they use some of these individuals use these broad areas, whereas others have a high degree of site fidelity, if you like, in a fairly narrow part of the Great Australian Bight. Okay, so a project that was sponsored by the FREC, funded by the FREC a couple of years ago, we pulled together all of the information following the workshop that we had down in Hobart. A workshop, there's a regional workshop. We pulled people together from right around the world that were experts in pelagic sharks. At that workshop, it was decided we needed to get a better idea of this degree of connectivity across the equator and within the Australasian and Indo-Pacific region. We used 4 methods. Now, I'm certainly not a geneticist, but we employed really good geneticists to do this work. We had Shannon Corrigan from over at Grice University in South Carolina, and the Grice Marine Lab, and she ran mitochondrial and microsatellite analysis and found that there was certainly some sex-biased dispersal in the data, so there was some cross-equatorial mixing coming out in the microsatellite DNA, but that wasn't prevalent in the mitochondrial DNA. Now this matched up quite nicely with the satellite telemetry data that we had for the species, and these are just summary plots, so the dots just mean that those areas were connected. Where there's a connection across the equator means that they were significant connections across the equator. Where there isn't a connection, it means that they weren't. Okay, so that's summarising a lot of genetic information there. Okay, so the second snapshot is on this current FRDC project that we have on pelagic sharks in Spencer Gulf and marine industries. It's a work in progress at the moment. We're actually using acoustic telemetry and satellite tracking information to understand the movements and the fidelity of bronze whalers and white sharks in relation to areas that are used by marine industries, areas that are used by the broad community. Okay, just got to wet the lips here a little bit, drying up a bit. Okay, so those tags down there on the bottom right are actually, we use the one that's second from the right, and those transmit a coded signal to a receiver that we've deployed in strategic locations around the Gulf. So the aim being to assess, as I said, residency and movement of white sharks and bronze whalers. We want to be able to compare the feeding areas and the areas used by marine industries and by the community. This is a track that we have generated from some satellite telemetry information from a white shark, a 4-metre white shark, and you can see there that this animal, after being tagged in the southern Spencer Gulf, actually migrated across the Great Australian Bight to the Recherche Archipelago and then around Cape Lewin and up to the Abrolhos Islands, where it turned around and subsequently returned a few months later. So the southwest region, white sharks are using the whole region is the take-home message so far from the prelim data. Okay, so the third snapshot is on the Great Australian Bight research project, so the research program. The program that we're running is actually it's based on a longline survey, so a pelagic longline survey. And what we found was when we actually did a literature review of the available information for the other pelagic sharks, so this is not including white sharks in the region, there was very little information for this region other than some very preliminary catch data. So following this literature review, which was a huge collaborative effort from people from the CSIRO, we've had people from both universities here in Adelaide and SARDI and others, we found that we were able to actually identify key gaps, and for Project 4.1, which is led by Simon Goldsworthy, we found, the project's actually called Status, Distribution, Abundance of Iconic Species and Apex Predators. We found we needed to assess biodiversity, the spatial and temporal distributions of pelagic sharks, and also use that information to identify key habitats by species, and then be able to aggregate that information into shared habitat use, so areas of ecological significance. And that project, again, it's a work in progress at the moment, but it's going to be a very powerful data set to be able to assess the use of mixed predator species in the Great Australian Bight and beyond. Okay, so a quick snapshot of the preliminary data. During the pelagic survey, we surveyed key submarine canyons from off Cape Decutic here at Station 1, right the way through to Station 7, which is pretty much due south at the head of the Bight. It's around about 196 kilometres south. It's right on the edge of, felt like we were right on the edge of the world out there, to be honest. But yeah, we went all the way out there and we actually found these species here. So we found blue sharks, shorefin makos, common thresher sharks, and big-eyed thresher, which is quite a rare species. We're able to fit those animals up, some of those animals up, as well as some white sharks we found as well. which were at the Neptune Islands, we were able to fit some of those animals up with electronic tags. And then since that period last autumn, we've been tracking 14 individuals. Okay, so the data you can see there on the left is just some summary information from a blue shark up the top there, which we tagged just southwest of Port Lincoln here out on the continental shelf slope. Animal maintained its position in that about 200 kilometre area there off the slope in oceanic and shelf slope habitats. And then during our winter it migrated all the way up here to this area south of Java, which is an offshore oceanic area that's characterised by a whole range of seamounts and other large bathymetric features. 2 minutes, thank you. This quick plot here just shows one of the Mako tracks that we had from the project. Okay, it's not all ginger beer and Skittles out in the Great Australian Bight, but that shot there sort of shows us traversing from island to island while we sheltered for some pretty bad weather. All right, so snapshot 4, and probably the key project in terms of this conference here today, is the project that we're doing at the moment to provide key information for management of the Neptune Islands Group Marine Park. Now this is a collaborative project that we do with Charlie Hoover from Flinders University, who plays a role in that in terms of tagging animals and also going out on the vessels and helping with the acoustic equipment and some analysis of some of the information. The aim being to provide indicators of residency of white sharks and being able to compare that information to historical information that was provided by the CSIRO. Neptune Islands is a little island chain. It's a mid-shelf mid-shelf continental shelf island chain, and it's really, you know, they're very steep granite outcrops, and it's a difficult place to work. But what we do out there is we essentially deploy those same acoustic tags on white sharks, and we're able to use the data to estimate how long each animal spends in that area whilst interacting with the area used by the cage diving industry. It's a tough place to keep equipment. You can see here some of the logistics required to work out there are significant. You need to anchor your gear out there with train wheels and floats and ship anchor ropes essentially to keep gear on the bottom to be able to monitor these animals. So a quick snap of the data. So far we've found that the residency at the Neptune Islands of 37 individuals can range anywhere between 1 and 117 days. The mean residency averaged across sharks, 15 animals in 2013, was around about 19 days, whereas more recently in the last monitoring period we were down to 9 days, which was similar to the patterns that CSIRO found in the previous monitoring period. The variance around those estimates is also quite significant. The Neptune Islands showed greater residency in the last monitoring period, so there's fluctuation around how the animals use that complex of islands out there. We prepare these reports based on that information. The reports are really geared towards providing clear management advice to Juna to be able to manage this industry in a way that's consistent with world's best practice in terms of developing trigger limits, developing key decision rules to be able to move on in the future with this industry in the world's best way. The most recent report has just been released, and yeah, it's an important thing to take out of this is while I'm standing up here today by myself and talking about all these things, we can't do it without the help of, we get help from about 20 odd commercial and recreational fishers and about 20 odd other scientists from around the region and around Indo-Pacific. We have the collaborations span from Western Australia all the way across through, and this is collaborators and helpers, through the state and around Victoria and up to Queensland. So you can see there, I won't read all of those out, but for each project, each of those projects I've just talked about, they're sponsored by the FREC, they're sponsored by, funded by Victorian DPI through the fishery licence fees, and also these other sponsors and collaborators here. So thanks very much for having me.
Okay, sorry. We've probably got time for 1 or 2 quick questions. If anybody's got any.
Well, what's the drivers of the migrations of some of the species?
It's a good question, Chris. For makos, we found that some of the key drivers were seasonality. So during the winter, quite a few of the animals were migrating up into the Indo-Pacific, to that area that I mentioned south of Java, whereas others were migrating down to the subtropical front, which is a really important oceanographic area, sort of level with Tasmania. It varies up and down, but yeah, there's key seasonal things that are happening out there with some of these species. And also the life history, like some of the juvenile animals were doing things that were similar to fish migrations, whereas the larger animals, so the animals we suspect to have been sexually mature based on their size, were spending more time in areas where there were larger prey, so dolphins, seals and other prey items like that, which you'd expect.
Okay, I think we'll move on. So
Thanks.
time. Next up is Charlie, who is from